Hi, and welcome to the ANA Master Circle Brands for Human webinar. I am Sharon Cornell, your meeting facilitator, and I have a few housekeeping items to go over. First of all, we would love to hear from you. At the bottom of your Zoom window is the chat icon. Please ask your questions there, and the moderator will ask the panelists during the last 15 minutes. If you miss anything, don't worry, we will be sending around an on-demand recording when it's available. You can turn off your VPN for a better viewing experience. Now, I'd like to introduce to you our host, Meg Wubenhorst, the Vice President of the CMO practice at the ANA.
Sharon. Hello and welcome to the first ever Brands for Humans webinar created exclusively for CMOs and senior marketing leaders like yourselves. I'm Meg and I work within the CMO Master Circle group at the ANA. And if you're watching this, that means you are a part of our Master Circle community along with 1,400 other CMOs. So here at the ANA, our North Star is the growth agenda, which is a framework, go ahead, John, move to the next one. A framework of 4 essential priorities for our industry, as you can see on this wheel. So first we have brand, which is reframing the role of modern marketing. We also have data, which is leveraging data and technology for growth and for good. Talent, developing talent and high-performing organizational structures. And then of course, society and sustainability, which is creating positive impact on society in a way that drives growth. So in order to drive these priorities forward, we created a global CMO growth council. And what that means is those are teams of CMOs and industry leaders like yourselves who are actively developing, like literally right now, I stopped developing it with them to come to this webinar. We're developing specific plans and resources to accelerate global economic and societal growth. So as a senior leader, you have 2 opportunities to help us in this effort. The first is to join one of the Global CMO Growth Council teams. Again, that's brand, data, talent, or society and sustainability. And share your leadership, your insights, your firepower, and most importantly, your time to help drive our industry initiatives and growth agenda forward. So we have meetings scheduled in September for all 4 of these growth priorities. So if you're able to and your time permits, we'd love to have you join. And I'll get to how to join in a moment. The second is to represent your organization at this year's Global CMO Growth Summit on October 19th. This is an invitation-only gathering of global chief marketers like yourselves, where we will share our actionable plans that we've put together with our CMOs with the shared objective of creating incremental growth opportunities for you, your companies, and the industry at large. So to learn more or to request an invitation to Summit, you can go to our website at anamastercircle.com or contact me or Smitty Kumar at the ANA. We understand this is an important time for all of us, and our marketing function has changed so much over the last 6 months as we face a health and economic crisis, as well as social unrest. And we know your time is precious. We really appreciate you being here today. We're excited to have you. We're excited to share with the Harris Poll and MDC Partners. We'll take you through in a moment. But if you're able, we also invite you to come together with your peers and help us be a force for good and force for growth as part of the Global Growth Council. So with that, I would like to introduce John Gerzema, who is CEO of the Harris Poll, and Ryan Linder, who is Executive Vice President and Global CMO of MDC Partners, who will be taking you through the presentation. Gentlemen, take it away.
Excellent. Thanks, Meg. Good morning, everybody. I believe there's some familiar faces on this call, which we can't see. Good morning to you, and hello to those who we do not yet know. And thanks for joining us for the Brands for Humans session. You know, speaking of 4 humans, I dropped off my 4 humans for their first day of school today, which was definitely a spoonful of new normal that I've been hungry for over the last 180 or so days. So with that, let's dive in. You know, the MDC and the Harris Poll, by way of context, we have been together polling consumer sentiment on the crisis as it unfolded in early March. Since then, we've been in the field 3 to 5 nights a week, asking Americans about everything from the fear of contracting the virus to their finances, life at home, feelings on reopenings, societal unrest, the economy, and what they need from marketers and brands to help restore consumer confidence and rebuild the economy. Now, today, we are fresh out of the field, and at the 6-month mark, 6 months, this gives us a unique opportunity to look back in order to look forward. How are we ever going to know where we're going if we don't remember where we've been? And this is by examining what's changed and what has not in American public opinion, lifestyle, consumption, and other activities. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and trusted colleague, John Gerzema, CEO of the Harris Poll. Johnny, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Meg. We're really honored to be here with the ANA Masters Circle community. We're going to get right into the data. We've got a lot to cover. I'm going to hit a number of things at a pretty high level. As we go through this, please send us questions. Know that there's lots of different verticals and streams of information we can go deeper on. And also, all of this data is on our website, theharrispoll.com COVID tracker, which we have alongside with the CDC and many others been issuing as sort of public guidance and a source for sort of public information, and it's all there for free. So as Ryan mentioned, we have been fielding ad nauseum. We went into field the first midweek in March 15th, right at the time America was in the middle of all this shock and disbelief. And through this process, we've tried to append a number of different Harris Poll studies with various partners. So we're going to touch on briefly things from the CDC, the work that we're doing with them on guidance. We are going to talk about the American Psychological Association with respect to sort of the national psyche and anxiety. We're going to touch on this beyond cadence of data from our tracker that we're conducting, as Ryan discussed. Then we're going to talk a little bit about voter sentiment as we try to weave together a forward-looking picture for the ANA marketing community as we look into the fourth quarter and into 2021. Okay, so we're going to start with the curtain of fear. And this is a researcher, something that I find tremendously remarkable to be able to track over time. One of the things that's really remarkable about the times that we're living in is we're actually able to not research people dispassionately, we can research ourselves. Because all of us are going through this unprecedented event. And you can see right at the outset in mid-March, there was this sense of irrational fear. 54%, majority of Americans, right at the time that the states and most of the states and the government shut down, 54% of Americans thought that national fear was irrational. Now today, 75% of Americans believe that national fear is sensible. A couple of other really interesting things in this chart is you can see how early on the fear was for the global recession at 84%. It was the fear for ventilator shortages at 74% on the right-hand side, because again, this was pocketed, concentrated areas. It was Washington State and the Northeast. But then you started to see the fear really tick up through the early parts of April as people began to grasp the sense of this being more sensible. They even started to take a more sort of very cautious look at going outside. And if you look at these, the fear of leaving home for essential errands, the amount of people that were afraid to leave their homes because of COVID, if you trend those lines across at the top, including the fear of a new wave of COVID, you can see roughly in America, we're in the high 70s, low 80s on all these measures, even as we speak today. Now, these have actually even upticked, as you can see on the right-hand side, 3 to 4 points over the past weekend. But I want to draw your attention to something really interesting in this chart and pretty remarkable. If you look at the two bottom lines, the red line and the green line, the orange line and the green line, the fear of losing your job at 56% and the fear of dying at 27%. What you see is that those two, over the course of 6 months, have basically tangled together like snakes of fear, really forcing this remarkable trade-off in American psyche, which is, do I risk my life for my job, and vice versa? And those numbers today still dominate. 60% people fear of dying from the virus, 56% of people still fear losing their jobs. So that's the world we live in today. Last time I looked outside, there isn't martial law, but you seriously have people feeling this curtain of anxiety over them that our leadership has not really been able on either side of the political aisle to really counteract. If I go forward here, Okay. So when we look at this in the context of activities, what we can actually see is that early on, venturing back out into daily life was largely underestimated. When we asked within a month, would Americans be dining out, 45% of people believed that would be the case. That's only 37% today. But across the spectrum, you can see as the virus took hold in America, all of the activities that we did that were part of daily life continued to sort of tip down through May. They peaked as the states began to reopening, only to find more virus to tip back down again. Now, some of these things have sort of leveled off, but you still have sort of a sense of only about a quarter of people estimating that they will be doing these types of leisure activities within the next month. Now, the same goes for business. When we ask questions, once the government provides information that the spread of virus is flattening, how long will it take you to do each of the following? Again, we were initially very bullish on going back to the office. 2/3 of us on that green line thought we'd be back within a month. Now that's 42% today. And that's a function of a number of different things. One is how Americans have become more comfortable from working from home, obviously, and their desire to move forward into a more blended working from home and working from the office environment. In fact, 83% of employees in America today agree that if work is able to be done remotely, employers should not require employees to return back to the office until COVID-19 is no longer a threat. So in that context, we also see the knock-on effect for all of the other business industries that serve business people, right? Which is public transportation, the rituals of businesses like conferences, greeting people with a handshake, attending a large social gathering, flying on a plane. We have not seen these tick up at all. In fact, Americans remain very pessimistic about them. 20% of Americans would have flown on a plane in mid-March. It's only 21% today. So continually, there's this fear that grips the nation. We also have seen a number of Americans that have contemplated major changes in their lives. In a study that we did with Axios, we found that 39% of people that live in urban cities have continued or considered rather to move to a less densely part of the country, including 23% of people moving potentially into the rural parts of America. Then 17% of the rural Americans feel quite content with where they're at. At the same time, 43% of urban Americans were the most likely of all Americans to be browsing real estate websites during the pandemic. So again, this massive dislocation is creating a lot of fear, and people are starting to think about things in different ways. So when we look at guidance and compliance, one of the things that happened as the fear took hold is Americans very much got on board. And a lot of some of the data I'm going to show you is against some of the media narratives that you see in cable TV on either side of the political ideology. But by and large, Americans have gone on board with wearing a mask across America, at least in their stated intentions. They do so because they believe it's going to put their health or their family at risk, and they feel this sense of greater responsibility. But one thing that was really interesting to note is how in this age of misinformation, how people have started to sort of blame people in different ways. It started in focuses around the government, and now it's moved into blaming young people. So people believed recently, as of late July, that the rise in cases were coming and that more deaths would be rising shortly. But the thing that they did is 76% of them blamed young people. They said even though younger people are getting the virus, they're more likely to transmit it to older at-risk people. That got us really curious, and so we started to go deeper into our data working with the CDC, and what we found is that a majority of Americans, including Gen Z, are actually by and large following safety recommendations for COVID, including staying at home, wearing masks, washing their hands, and these other protocols. And you can see on the right-hand side, Gen Z tracks right along with the national population. But it gets a little bit more interesting. We just completed a youth study with the CDC to look at how Gen Z are managing this time of sort of massive dislocation. And the thing that you really need to understand is that the narrative of young people being reckless super spreaders, the things that you see in the media about off-campus parties, and all that. Certainly that's happening, but that is pocketed based on what we're seeing in our overall national data. In fact, Gen Z actually are more selfless. When we look at the things that the reasons why they are feeling this stress, by and large, it's for the health of their family members. This is a study of 16 to 23-year-olds that we just conducted 10 days ago. They're also highly worried about the uncertainty of their future, but they're also worried about the country as a whole. But look as we go down, the numbers are more selfless at the top, they become more selfish at the bottom, right? Not being able to socialize, fear of missing out on milestones. That sort of thing we thought was quite interesting. And I think it's really important to understand that Gen Z during this pandemic are going through major life decisions. You may have some of those youngsters at home. I know I do. They're making decisions about college. They're making decisions about, what they're going to do with work. ACT tests, SATs, all those things are being disrupted, and it's causing heightened anxiety. And so we see in their data, they are very likely to get on board with all these recommendations. One of the more interesting dynamics in our study is that this is a women-led movement among young people. Young women actually, by and large, outscore younger men in this 16 to 23 against all these different measures. So when we look at that, when we see the differences of why people don't follow guidance, it actually comes down to something quite sensible, which is one, they believe that they are already taking strong precautions, or they are forgetful. And this is both the general population and Gen Z as a whole. So the constant guidance of offering this information as a reminder becomes really important. But I want to really urge you, I believe we have greatly underestimated the power of young people in helping to sort of solve this virus. We have seen in all of our other Harris data that young people, Gen Z, are driving activism on Black Lives Matter, on income inequality, and on many other social inclusivity issues. They have not yet, barring seeing leadership, they have not yet seen this argument of COVID framed in an activist context so that they can get on board and share it. And that is an opportunity for all of us as we think about the Master's Circle. Again, framing this around ethical activism is something that's really important. The number 1 and 2 reasons that Gen Z want to get on board with COVID is to make life normal again, clearly because of this disruption, but this social desire, this desire to want to protect others and to get involved and to help to fight the pandemic. Again, we think this is really important. Ultimately, all of us want to protect others to get life back to normal, and we see very high numbers in the 90s. Again, more of a selfless ethos. I'm going to touch on that as we go through the next series of data, because you're going to see something we think that could really be triggered to help us drive further changes to beating this pandemic. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the 2 COVID economies briefly before we get into going deeper into marketing and what it looks like as we look ahead. The first thing that's really important to understand is that there has been just a remarkable flip in attitudes among voters. This is from our Harvard Harris poll data from about 3 weeks ago. And what we find is that 2/3 of voters say the US economy is weak. And this is a stunning turn of events from where attitudes were before the crisis took hold in America in March. But what's really important to understand here is that there is 2 economies, right? So we asked people across the surveys in Harris for the past 26 weeks, do you think your income is going to be lower, which is orange, higher, which is green, or about the same, which is brown? And you can see that by and large, 44% of Americans actually think their income is going to be the same. 30% believe it's going to be lower. But let's focus in on that 26% of Americans that believe their income is going to be higher. The delta between household incomes making $100,000 more versus household incomes under $50,000 is 36% to 19%. Said another way, people with lower incomes have been hit disproportionately harder during this crisis. As is the case, as we go deeper into that mindset, we start to understand how exacerbating that is on their lives. So we asked this question, which do you think will have a bigger impact on the life on you and your family? And you can see on the right-hand side, wealthier households see the virus itself and the economic impact of the virus to be fairly similar. 47% the virus, 53% the economic impact. But look at the difference of people that make less than $50,000. 63% see the economic impact is going to have a longer lasting impact on them and their family than COVID itself. So we can see the pain that ordinary Americans are feeling as they are navigating this crisis. And we saw the latest unemployment figures released this morning, which again underscores this impact. Lastly, the two areas of folks in America that have really been hit hard have been younger Americans. We see that, for example, across these different measures, you'll see the general population numbers at the top, but we'd ask questions, have you cut back on savings? Have you lost income partially? Have you accumulated more debt than normal? Will you miss a bill payment or soon, et cetera? And across the board, you can see that Gen Z and Millennials far outtrack, almost double the number of issues and pain of economics than boomers or seniors. Again, important to understand how hard young people are being hit by this. And then lastly, it's very important to understand that people of color in America have also been disproportionately impacted economically by COVID. So when you look at these lines, you will see a straight line for data on white Americans, a dotted line for data on Black Americans. And as you see across the board, you see more pain for Black America by and large. One of the more startling numbers in here, and this is again referring to that previous chart of missing a bill payment or seeking out sources of additional income. But look at the bottom, the dotted line in green that says I have not been impacted financially. That is only 11% of Black Americans in our country. So when we think about the pain and how this has been brought about, I'm going to touch on this at the end, we need to be very inclusive as a marketing community to understand this is not a simple look at an economy in aggregate. There are specific pockets of our country, of our Americans, that are really feeling this pain disproportionately, and that's going to impact their spending. Briefly, since we're here on this topic, it is hopeful to note that since Ferguson in 2014, we went back into the data to ask the same questions that we asked in the Harris poll after the shooting of Michael Brown. And we can actually see that there's remarkable movements on empathy and understanding among the American population. This is a question that asked if you think that Black people are discriminated against or not in the areas of being treated by the police, full equality, getting decent housing. And you can see that that lighter green line, which is the new data from this past summer, really shows substantial growth in empathy over 2014 during the Ferguson data when this was first collected. Of course, today, the tragic shooting this week in Kenosha of Jacob Blake is going to send us back into field to understand if this continual events are actually placing more pressure on driving up this empathy. But the sense that there is hope this time is really interesting in our data when we look at Americans. One of the things that really is interesting, we asked a question, do you believe this time is different? And if so, why, when thinking about the racial equality movement? And one of the really interesting bumps is that now people believe that there's more people involved than before. This is intersectional, multi-generational, multiracial that are out in the streets protesting how the Black community is treated in America. And there's a sense of hope that there's more sense of understanding. So in that context, there seems to be some sense of progress. Now, the broader part of this, if we step back and we think about the three things that have happened, right? COVID, economic impact of COVID, our attention on racial injustice in America and on income inequality, you get a picture of an American psyche that is truly evolving. And this is one of my favorite charts in the presentation, but we have been tracking how Americans have felt about the pandemic. And you can see along the bottom line, you can see lots of measures around being having cabin fever, being angry, being lonely, having fear, feeling overwhelmed, feeling claustrophobic, and feeling annoyed. Those are all sort of at the bottom. And those basically have run consistently in the sort of the high 40s to 50s to a few in the lower 30s since our study began. But what's really interesting is look at those top three dimensions, right? One is a question of appreciation in green. Are you appreciative? Orange is, are you thankful? And then that beige line at the top at 77% is compassionate. We think this is really interesting. These numbers have held strong in such regard. And we believe one of the things that's happened is that while Americans sheltered in place, and in many of our interviews that we do, our ethnographies, we've talked to parents that have said, I've had my kids at home under one roof. You know, I've spent more time with my children. I've reformed relationships, whether it's through virtual happy hours or with my spouse or significant other. So this sense of reflection and gratitude is remarkable in our data. And we believe that is something that can be harnessed, because if you can see the positive emotions, those three horses running ahead at 72, 71, and 70, they've got a 17-point lead on anger at 53%. We think that is really interesting. And there is a sense of this gratitude and reflection that has not yet been harnessed in America by any leader of any political party or by business at large. Now, we also know that Americans are missing a lot, all right? There is this sense of loneliness. We're social creatures, so we're missing our social gatherings. We miss going to coffee shops. We miss gathering with friends and family. We miss going to concerts. We miss all that stuff. You know, we miss going to church. So this sense of loneliness, of missing social activity is clearly something that began at the highs of about 3/4 of Americans, but the majority of Americans, by and large, miss a lot of things about daily life, obviously. But with that comes a real, again, that focus of compassion and faith. You're seeing that how much people miss going to church, miss gathering with their friends and family. You put these together, you start to see that there is this longing for family, community, and faith that has been taken away from people, right? Because we can't fly, we can't travel by and large. And so people are feeling increasingly detached and lonely. And that's driving some really remarkable data that we just released with the American Psychological Association. Here we find anxiety, particularly among younger people, anxiety is gripping the nation. 58% of Americans say their stress level is higher than pre-COVID. 78% of Americans say that it's a significant source of stress, and 83% say the future of our nation is a significant source of stress. This versus 66% in 2019. So these triple crises are really starting to hit people. But take a look at this. We asked this question every year in the Harris poll since 1966, and 72% of Americans said this is the lowest period in American history that they can remember. So important to understand that for young people, for anyone alive today, this is our Pearl Harbor. I'd go extended to say that 6 months starts to represent a World War II-like malaise and sense of sort of understanding that has sort of gripped the nation. Now, this is also driving a new pessimism, and clearly we're only 65 to 70 days out from the election. This is going to continue to change, but the number of voters, you see the country on the right track versus the wrong track, again, that remains at an all-time low in our data. So this pessimism sort of continues to abound. And with that pandemic, what's wearing on is that trust is eroding. Because the issues around COVID have started to be so politicized, the health sciences group in the upper left, the people that we really felt we believed in and we continued to hold in high esteem, doctors and nurses, scientists, governors, local health care workers, those numbers, albeit high, are continuing to slide as the data continues to be politicized. Local government, which has been held far higher than the White House or the federal government, that's even sliding as things become more political. The media has done a terrible job either side of the political aisle in terms of engendering faith and unity. And so as a result, Americans are trusting their tribes. They're focusing on their friends and family. They're focusing on their employees and their connections to give them accurate information. So when we look at our historical Harris Poll alienation index, we've been fielding this since 1966. Typically, we ask 7 questions that help us understand how many people feel alienated from America. And these are questions like the rich get rich, the poorer get poorer, what leaders think about me doesn't matter much. So the series of questions form the basis of this index, and it helps us understand how many people feel detached from the nation. And what we can see is that during times of conflict, such as the Vietnam War, we were at 59% alienation. But what typically happens is that when a conflict is resolved, unity happens and alienation drops. So we saw 59% drop to 51% during the Vietnam War. Same was the case during 9/11. Same was the case during the financial crisis. But today, guys, 68% of Americans feel alienated. That is higher than during the Vietnam War. So that data point I talked to you earlier about, the fact that Americans feel thankful and gratitude, they're empathic towards others, they want to care about their nation. This has not yet been harnessed as a means to sort of drive recovery and to bring more people together. And that's an opportunity. One of the opportunities, therefore, is calling to business. You know, when we look at typical crises, companies this time during this crisis are seen as part of the solution rather than the problem. The financial crisis definitely hurt America, and we saw all industries drop. But look at how industries have risen during coronavirus as America has turned to business to offer leadership and to offer support. In fact, across the board, from healthcare doctors to retail to small businesses, by and large, we've seen phenomenal jumps in positivity. When asked the question, how has your view on this industry changed since the start of the coronavirus pandemic? 2 notable exceptions being the aforementioned media and the airline industry, which has really struggled to stay abreast of this sense of positivity. I think this is another really important chart. This is a questions that we asked about the role of businesses being involved. And one of the things we asked a question, and we got 8 out of 10 Americans agreeing that large companies with resources, infrastructure, advanced logistics are even more vital now to America's future than before the pandemic. Now, while typically in our reputation studies, we see lots of startups, smaller companies, this was the era of blue chip companies coming to the rescue of America. We saw this in 2 recent studies, our Axios Harris Poll 100 and our Essential 100 corporate reputation study, where Americans really came to rely on companies, especially big companies. And then look in this middle chart, 72% of Americans trust companies more than the federal government to find solutions to COVID and racial equality. 76% believe them to be more reliable. And again, when you see on the right-hand side, there's a lot of forgiveness if businesses speak out on social issues. They want to hear their vision, they believe they should respond, and even if they stumble, they don't care that it's important to see how they think. And there's a sense of forgiveness. But most importantly, 72% of Americans believe that when a company speaks out, it's living up to their internal values. Why we think that's important ultimately is that Americans believe, give businesses a good job, a good mark on COVID, less so on other inclusivity issues. These are still a work in progress, like the economic security of their workforce or solving racial injustice in their country. So when we look at this, and we have a whole separate presentation we could go deeper on, the important thing to understand here is you need to factor in risk mitigation into your strategies, because there is a new social phenomenon, which is the optics of indifference. Said a simpler way, not doing something can be as dangerous as doing something. And that's what we see in this data. By and large, Americans believe that the pandemic has exposed not only underlying structural issues within American society, it's also offered us the opportunity to create a reset button. And they say that they will remember companies that do the right thing, trying to solve this crisis. So we think this is a big opportunity for business to lead. And then lastly, again, more data later that we could cover, but Americans are viewing and supporting companies that boycott, for example, social media in a more favorable light by a almost 2-to-1 margin. So we're going to get into the final section and look at demand and then leave with questions. So what we have seen is life reordered. We asked this question at the beginning: once the pandemic is over, what do you think will be very different or somewhat different or mostly the same? And this is the sum total of people saying very or somewhat different after COVID. And you can see 2/3 to almost 70% of Americans believe that travel, work life, shopping, social activities are going to be somewhat or very different. Now, when we look at what's different in terms of consumer spending, the first thing we need to understand is that there is some pent-up demand building. We're seeing pent-up demand building for vacations, for traveling, for new clothes. We've also seen rising demand for new household goods as people are sheltering in place and they're taking a look around and figuring out if their Wi-Fi is strong enough or if they have enough rooms for desks for that work from home sort of attitude. There's more personal electronics demand rising. We've seen demand for cars rise precipitously since the beginning of the crisis as people are afraid to take public transportation. But the two biggest things that are driving the growth are stockpile of goods, vacations a little bit above that, but look at the one at the top, 51% is savings. So we believe that savings are actually sort of the enemy of consumption right now. And that's because of the economic issues that we talked about earlier. This is not simply a case of people going out to the Hamptons or people going on vacations and spending. Yes, certainly there are pockets of people that are living that life, but 85% of people have been impacted by the financial crisis, or by the COVID crisis rather. And this has created a sense of worry. And that's why that high level of savings that started at 59% has dropped off 8 points, but hasn't really changed over the course of the last 6 months. People are scared and they're really worried. And I think what's really important about that, and a couple of things I'll just touch on real briefly, is that, domestic consumption, which accounted for 68% of America's GDP last year, that's really going to suffer if all we focus on is not really addressing this rich-poor gap that continues to be widened as a result of COVID through the data I showed you. So when we think about, government various policies that they can use to stimulate, different parts of the economy, there really isn't a tool for stimulating consumer confidence. And so that consumer confidence, that per capita consumption, is what I'm really concerned about as I look into 2021. We actually believe, given the data we've seen, 82% of Americans in a recent Axios Harris Poll survey believe the expiration of the unemployment benefits would have an adverse effect on the economy. 72% believe economic growth will be a lot worse in the months to come. So looking ahead, per capita consumption really has to be accounted for. If we can't ease the suffering of lower income people, people of color, younger people, and account for them in this economy, that's going to continue to suppress consumer demand. Now, the other couple things that we're seeing changing are eating habits. There's more home-cooked meals, more fresh foods, but there's another part of that diet, which is more consumption and indulgence of soft drinks, candy, fast food. These sort of double diets that are existing in the American household may be a part of function. But the other thing they're saying to us that's interesting is that they believe they will continue these habits into next year and beyond. I think what's unsaid in that chart too is that they're accounting for working from home. How else are you going to be able to do home cooked meals by and large, as well as working in the office as they move forward. So we do believe that's going to be one fundamental thing that's going to change. People are watching a lot more TV. They're spending a lot more time on digital, obviously. Data that you've probably seen before. And our data with the Wall Street Journal, we saw significant growth in subscriptions for Disney Plus, Netflix. By and large, the parents of American kids are watching 4 hours more of streaming services a day. But now let's look ahead and finish in where we think things are going. So the first thing is that there is a blanket of pessimism that does extend into autumn. As of last week, in a study that we conducted with USA Today, 59% of Americans believe their kids are going to be taking courses online from home. The near same number, 56%, believe they're going to be working from home. 53% believe they're going to be voting in person, but another 49% believe they're going to be voting from mail. So less people believe they're going to be working from the office. You've got about almost 40% very cynical about an NFL season. And again, as you look ahead into the travel, only 29% say they'll stay in a hotel or travel for the traditional winter holidays. Same situation with, unfortunately, with Halloween and the college football season. You see a lot of pessimism about future activities in the near term. And at the same time, they do anticipate they're going to be spending more after the pandemic. When we look at groceries, personal care, medical products, particularly groceries, we see those numbers rising above the mean. So these are a few of the sectors where the consumer really feels they miss things and have sort of pent up demand. Apparel, which has been hit really hard, is something that they're very focused on as they look forward, as well as consumer electronics. We did, as of last weekend, do a quick peek into holiday. And I thought what was really interesting here is that 58% of Americans said they would actually spend the same or more. And that's the exact same number as last year. So again, when you think about those emotions and gratitudes and the FOMO of everything we've missed, perhaps holiday season might be better than expected based on the desire for families, especially parents, to really sort of provide some sense of, at least through objects, well-being. In some of our other data, gift giving has continued to rise throughout the crisis. Now, without too much obviousness as I conclude this, this is clearly digital acceleration to the 9th degree. And we're seeing Americans, by and large, being very satisfied with online shopping. And I think this is important, as you think about the decisions that the Growth Council and the industry initiatives are taking on for marketing, that we really grasp this as a critical understanding. And this extends to really understanding how to digitally accelerate all our businesses in order to serve the customer. Because there's a combination of satisfaction with digital commerce, plus an increasing interest in curbside pickup for following products like groceries, home goods, personal care, medical products. So things that we would have walked in, to the pharmacy for, we're more interested in gathering these online. So, I think what's kind of interesting about that data is that between retail shopping and online, the game is really about points of parity and points of differentiation, right? Points of parity for online needs to be about being able to do it the best to match that experience, but where the points of differentiation clearly lie are in convenience, accessibility, and safety in the coming months as people are worried about spending time in retail environments. And we also believe these digital tendencies are here to stay. 2/3 believe virtual happy hours could be as good as happy hours at bars and restaurants, especially among older Americans. Getting takeout from a restaurant versus dining in, we see 65% growth, and their numbers have ticked down a little bit, but again, points of parity, points of differentiation, these continue to sort of be competitive as American behaviors change. And then, Americans do miss the experience of shopping, but it's important to note they're becoming more reliant on digital. We ask questions about what do you miss? And clearly almost half of Americans miss the shopping experience. They miss the testing, products, being able to, the tactile sensation. They miss browsing, 38%. But look at things like this. They're using chatbots more. They're using video reviews more or the same. And when you sum total those numbers, you can see that you have almost mid-50s on chatbots, video reviews, relying on articles about a product or online reviews or on the website. And clearly, they're not doing those things less during COVID. So lastly, what we think retailers will need to do is instill confidence in consumers around safety. Safety is a customer journey. There still is a high degree of interest in getting back to bricks and mortar retail. We see Americans missing it in our detail, but for now, digital is sort of doing the job. Lastly, where do we go from here? Well, the thing I kind of want to leave you with is that the vaccine is really the economy. So there's sort of two economies until we get a vaccine. And so, you know, Americans for now support a lockdown. They're happy to do that. And they've felt that they have been effective in the past. And so as they see flare-ups, what seems to be happening in our data is that Americans are starting to understand that COVID is a little bit like forest fires, and you've got to stomp out the embers. So 72% of Americans are willing to give up their data to understand, to be part of a collective sort of COVID tracker, to be able to understand where the flare-ups are and so how they can avoid those areas. So potentially with more unity and more guidance, we might be able to do a better job with more rapid testing to be able to address these issues. Lastly, the Americans do support a vaccine priority system. They put healthcare workers at the top and then seniors. We find this quite interesting because this is a reversal from the traditional healthcare model in America, unfortunately, which really sort of prioritizes people with assets and money over people that don't. That is good, but that altruism really stops at the border. We asked a question, if Americans were to solve the vaccine first, should it go abroad? And by and large, Americans say, make it in America, keep it in America. And lastly, Americans do see a vaccine, a financial recovery within a year, though not all of them are going to get vaccinated. There is a lot of concern early on about whether the vaccine will have the right efficacy, if it's been too rushed. So while 69% are likely, there's about a third of Americans that are going to take sort of a wait and see attitude. So Meg, that's kind of our look at where we're seeing, you know, we have a precautions in daily life will sort of resume. We're going to continue to do the things that we can do to make us feel safe. But I think if I leave you with anything, this is a vaccine-driven economy. It's an economy that has two different parts of it that we need to account for the recovery. There's a growth and expression and support for digital. And lastly, I think we really haven't tapped that sense of gratitude and thankfulness in America that could be sort of a really powerful motivator for helping us move forward. So that's an exhausting, fast look at 6 months of COVID in America.
Thank you so much. I have gratitude and appreciation for you guys. Thank you. That was a lot of really good information. We've had some questions pop up. Some are slide specific. So I just want to point out that we will share this presentation and the video download for viewing later, and these slides as well. So no need to worry if a slide went by a little bit too fast. We had a lot of information, or John had a lot of information to cover. My dog is really excited about it as well, as you can hear. So we did have some questions. Do you have any data on consumer sentiment about products made outside the US?
Yes, we have it in various data that may not be directly related to that question, but sort of a lot of, I can say at the top line, a lot of concern about things that aren't made in America right now. There's a lot of sort of anti-China sentiment that has been sort of drawn a concern. But I can go back and look at our other traditional brand data outside of COVID to see if I can answer that question, and we'll flip that along with the deck.
So what's, out of all these insights, and there's so many interesting learnings, since you've been doing this for 6 months, what's been the most surprising shift in the last couple of months as we settle into, you know, the 6-month mark?
I mean, a couple have been widely reported, but they're very much referred in this, validated in this data, is that Americans are quite happy working from home. You know, there's a sense that they will blend together working from home with working at the office. But for many Americans, and remember Gen Z, sort of a sense of a startup, you know, nation that was building with WeWorks and other things before COVID hit, there was a desire for remote working, particularly among younger generations. And so one of the things we're seeing in the data, Meg, is that Americans are contemplating living somewhere else, you know, in order to work. And so I'm not ready to short commercial real estate or short American cities. I think it's too early to do that, but definitely there's a sense of a blending work life that's across America. a couple other things I guess I could throw in there real fast. I think this is a massive opportunity for companies to differentiate on values. We're seeing that what used to be corporate comms and corporate affairs is now marketing. I actually believe with younger generations, it's all one thing. Said another way, younger people buy brands from companies they admire. And you saw in some of that data that I went through quite quickly that there's a big opportunity for business right now to lead on values, and that is becoming a new discriminator for brand differentiation. So happy to go deeper on that at another time, but this is a real big opportunity for companies to differentiate at a time when Americans are turning to companies because they believe that they've been quite effective in solving some of these problems.
Yeah, that was actually one of our questions is what is a brand's role? And Ryan, this is to you too. What is a brand's role in this moment where you're trying to have a brand purpose and extend that to your customers and clients and consumers? So how does a brand move forward with the optics of indifference, to avoid optics of indifference?
Go ahead, Ryan.
I think standing for something is paramount. We're doing some amazing work with Verizon right now and have just launched Citizen Verizon, and you'll see that come to life as we turn the corner in the next into the next several months, and really kind of putting actions out front. Saying you're standing for something, saying you're doing something is one thing, but actually showing through action is paramount.
Absolutely. And what categories do you expect to bounce back in fourth quarter versus longer term?
Yeah, I mean, what we saw some nice confidence numbers around holiday spending, which surprised me. And again, I think part of that is very emotional, driven by this claustrophobia and gratitude that I kind of talked about. People's relationships focus on family, missing their friends. So we don't see travel to bump up extensively, but we do think gift giving, we think experiences are going to come back roaring in 2021 as soon as there is a vaccine or at least a more reliable method of testing. We've already saw that in our data this summer. Americans bought more cars. They did staycations or regional vacations using cars. There's more interest in hotel occupancy is sort of starting to slowly tick up, although the airlines aren't yet in our data. But I also think, there is this sense of revenge spending. We did see high growing needs, as I talked about, for clothing, for vacations, for consumer electronics, gifts, anything kind of in the home remodeling is doing great. And, different food. This is a big opportunity right now for reconsideration, not only at the corporate level, because remember I showed you that data that all industries are being perceived more positively. If I'm in pharmaceutical, I'm not considered that I'm weighed down by the traditional pharma baggage of that industry. This is an opportunity to create your own Oscar in insurance if you're a pharmaceutical company, because this is a time of reappraisal. So that's off tangent maybe from your question, but I think there's a lot of demand that's sort of building, but there's also a lot of opportunity for brands to sort of differentiate.
And our last question, because we're running out of time, unfortunately, and if we didn't get to your question, we'll follow up with you directly. Any unique trends amongst the 55 and over segment? We focus a lot on Gen Z and millennials. What about the older generation?
Yeah, well, I think you're lumping me into that older generation.
Never.
Yeah, one of the real interesting things is a lot of reinvention around sort of 50 plus. They tended to be in our data the most interested in potentially moving or relocating back into cities. So they're looking at this as an opportunity, whether it's changing jobs or moving. But I also think there's a lot of demand. Remember, you still have among boomers tremendous disposable income. We told you earlier they haven't been hit as hard by the crisis, so they feel a little bit more aggressive in their spending, which is a big opportunity, I think, across a lot of different sectors.
Meg, I'll share something as we kind of wrap this out. Call it a shoot of optimistic inspiration, right? And obviously, you know, conforming to the new purchase behaviors in the new in the new mandatories and realities of the consumer journey, no matter which industry you're in, is of the utmost importance. I was on the phone yesterday with a good friend of mine, a longtime client of MDC, and that is Marissa Hunter, the North American CMO of Fiat Chrysler Automobiles. And we were having a very frank conversation about some pivots that they need to make. I mean, this is highly considered purchase category, automobiles, et cetera. It's a big decision people are faced with now and will be in the future. That purchase behavior for that segment has clearly changed. And she said something that was very simple. And I have to tell you, I thought about it a lot last night. I thought about it first when I opened my eyes this morning. And she said something very simply, and that is, you know, those who are going to prevail, right? Brands and businesses. On the other side of this, and it's quite simple, are those who have the energy to figure it out and figure it out smartly. So taking that as a banner as we wrap the call is my little shoot of optimism for everybody.
That is the perfect way to end the call. Thank you for that.
Thank you for the time. And John and I just consider it the highest honor to be an extension of this CMO Growth Council leadership community. So the more value that we can add, the more information that we can lend to you all by way of arming folks with the right insights to fight the fight, we're all for it.
Awesome. And just 3 quick wrap up points. Again, the slides and recording will be available and emailed to you. If we didn't get to your question, we will follow up separately. And then for more information about joining the Global CMO Growth Council and helping us work on the growth agenda, or to hear more about Summit on October 19th, the gathering of senior marketing leaders, email Smitty Kumar or Meg Rubenhorst, or check out our website at anamastercircle.com. We really appreciate your leadership and your time to help our industry. We will continue bringing you exclusive content like this. And a huge thank you to John and Ryan for a very informative and important presentation. And thank all of you for your time. And we hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.